Hello and welcome to the introduction of my new series, Fly Fishing Hatches. I'm Raj Kletke, and in this series we'll be learning not only about some super hatches, but how to recognize the lesser hatches and fish them also. Many fishermen think only of super hatches when we say hatch. Super hatches are not that common, and getting a chance to fish one may be quite rare, but lesser hatches are very common and you should know about them also. We'll be tying specific flies and fly fishing specific hatches. I will have videos for the fly tying and some visual aids. We'll be critically examining the flies we tie and discussing a few specific hatches at some length. So at least in part, this will be a lecture series. It may not be for everyone. I'll try not to be too boring, but I will apologize in advance. We'll be concentrating on a very limited number of common hatches, so likely you'll see them on your streams. But after discussing a specific hatch, we'll generalize the important features to help you apply the same principles to other hatches. By the end of this series, I hope you'll have an understanding of different types of hatches and can make knowledgeable decisions about proper flies and how to use them for many, if not most, of the major and minor hatches you'll likely encounter. This is a fairly ambitious goal, so I need to move quite quickly to cover all of this. To move along quickly, I am assuming some basic knowledge of fly tying. If you don't understand some tying technique that I'm showing, please review the appropriate part from my series on rotary vise techniques. I'm also assuming a little knowledge of entomology. We'll be discussing some entomology features in slightly greater depth and expanding on some of the oversimplifications that I used in my previous series. But if you don't understand some of the entomology terms, please review my series on simple entomology for the fly tyer and fly fisherman. Since we're discussing fly fishing hatches, we need a definition of a hatch. Clearly, we're not talking about the transformation from an egg to a tiny larva or nymph, as that's not a fishable event. The definition I used in my simple entomology series emphasized selective feeding. While it served its purpose then, really referring to super hatches, it was a marked oversimplification. While still not ideal, a better definition emphasizes that a hatch may elicit feeding. Note that it may elicit feeding. Not all hatches do at all times. Trout will sometimes stay dormant even during a hatch. Also note that I said feeding, not necessarily selective feeding. Most of the lesser or minor hatches do get trout actively feeding, but the feeding may not be that selective, and you may not need a specific match-the-hatch fly. Used this way, hatches are common, almost daily events on many trout streams. Even this definition is not perfect, but I'm not ready to discard the term hatch. However, for most of the common aquatic organisms, I like to subtype hatches as pre-emergent, emergent, or post-emergent. For other organisms, I lump hatches under abundant. For these organisms to function like a hatch, abundant organisms must be available to the fish. So now let's really get started. In part 2 of this series, we'll start discussing the Trico spinner fall, a common post-emergent hatch. We'll tie Al's polywing Trico spinner, the fly most commonly used for this spinner fall, and critically examine that fly. I'm Raj Kletke, and I'll see you soon.